It all began on a calm weekend night. Freed from work for the first time in a while, I was enjoying some quiet moments on my private terrace, tending to my herbs. However, that peace was brutally shattered by the shrill sound of the intercom. On the monitor screen appeared my father, Daniel Morgan, my mother, Lauren, and my younger sister, Vanessa, their faces tense. An unannounced visit without an appointment. And that face of my father. The domineering expression he always wore when he came to demand something ran a cold premonition through my chest. When I opened the door, the three of them barged in without even a proper greeting, as if it were their own home. Vanessa, in particular, looked around the living room with an openly appraising gaze and declared, "Well, this is better taste than I expected, Madison. For you, anyway." I hid a sigh and asked, "What do you want?" "Dad, Mom?" "Vanessa. You could have at least called." Then my father, slumping arrogantly into the sofa, replied, "Does a family need permission to visit their daughter's home? More importantly, I want to sit and talk." My parents settled onto the luxurious sofa, while Vanessa stood before the fireplace as if she were the mistress of the house. I remained standing, facing them alone. In the strained air, I prompted them to speak. "So, what is it you want to talk about?" My father said bluntly, "Give this penthouse to Vanessa." "What?" For a moment, I couldn't comprehend what he had said. The words were so outrageous that my brain refused to process them. And yet, his eyes held no trace of a joke. This penthouse was the modest symbol of victory I had finally obtained through relentless, blood-soaked effort. Relying only on scholarships, I graduated from college, survived the harsh competition of Wall Street, and endured the injustices of a male-dominated world while sacrificing all of my private life to build my career. All of it was for the sake of obtaining a castle of my own, a place where no one could control me. As if mocking my confusion, Vanessa opened her mouth. "Didn't you hear me, dear sister? I said I'm taking this house. Think about it, won't you? I am the legitimate bloodline of the prestigious Morgan family. It is I who should be living in a residence that stands at the top of this city." Both Mom and Dad agree. Even my mother continued, as if lecturing me, "Madison, please listen. Vanessa is right. As the daughter of Jonathan Morgan, the investment banker's heir, she needs a home that matches her status." Suppressing the surge of anger that threatened to overwhelm me, I argued back. "Wait, I don't understand. This is the home I bought with the money I earned through my work. You never gave me a single dollar in support. Why should I give it to Vanessa?" At those words, my father raised his voice. "Do you still not understand? Think about the dignity of the family. How can the heir of the Morgan family, Vanessa, live in a shabby apartment while you, the burden of the family, reside in a place like this? It is a disgrace in the eyes of society." "A burden?" "That's right. You are nothing but a burden. It is only natural that you devote yourself to the heir, Vanessa. Hand over this house without complaint. If you refuse, then you will be completely cut out of the inheritance. You will not receive a single cent, mark my words." My father's threatening words echoed through the living room. My mother cast her eyes downward, while Vanessa wore a triumphant smile. Ah, it was the same again. Ever since childhood, it had always been this way. All value was placed in Vanessa, and I was merely her backdrop. My efforts and successes were nothing more than tools to embellish their pride. But today, I was no longer the powerless daughter who could do nothing but cry herself to sleep. The moment I heard my father's ultimatum, something snapped inside my head. The anger and resignation I had suppressed deep in my heart for so many years began to transform into a quiet determination. I was no longer the daughter who would be hurt by their unreasonable demands. I had been quietly sharpening my fangs for this very day. I slowly lifted my face and looked straight at Vanessa, who wore a triumphant expression, and at my father, whose face was stern. Then, I let out a faint laugh. "That's an amusing joke, Dad, by the way." I paused there and began walking slowly toward the study. I could feel their suspicious gazes stabbing into my back as I quietly asked, which one of us was really the so-called heir, I wonder? From a locked drawer in the study, I took out a heavy file. It was the bundle of truths I had spent the past several months collecting, sacrificing sleep night after night. When I returned to the living room, I slammed the thick file onto the glass coffee table with a deliberately loud noise. With a heavy thud, all three of them flinched. The color drained from my father's face, my mother gasped, and Vanessa's confident smile twisted into one of bewilderment and confusion. None of them seemed to understand the meaning of the file in my hands. That was just as well, for I was about to reveal, one page at a time, the abhorrent secrets of the Morgan family that had been concealed for 27 years. It was half a year ago when I began to harbor decisive doubts about my family. My paternal grandmother, the only ally I had in this house and the one who truly loved me, passed away. Since childhood, while my father, mother, and Vanessa called me a burden and treated me coldly, my grandmother alone would stroke my head and embrace me. Madison, you are so clever and truly kind. Why, when we were sisters born of the same parents, was one deemed the heir and the other dismissed as the burden? Even my grandmother never explained the reason. She only told me that it was the absolute rule of this house, and in my young heart I could only accept it as such. Vanessa was always given the latest dresses and toys, while I only received her hand-me-downs. When Vanessa wanted to learn piano, the finest teacher was hired for her. But when I showed interest in ballet, I was dismissed with, "A burdened daughter does not need such luxuries." My existence was nothing more than a backdrop to make Vanessa shine brighter. That was why I devoted myself desperately to my studies, setting my goal to leave this house by my own power. And whenever my father bought expensive gifts only for Vanessa, my grandmother would always secretly call me afterward. "This must be our little secret from them." Saying that, she gave me the books I had truly wanted and beautiful ribbons as presents. Why do Dad and Mom treat Vanessa and me so differently? When I asked through tears, my grandmother would always respond with a sorrowful face. "I cannot tell you yet. But Madison, you have done nothing wrong. You are the true pride of this family." She repeated those words again and again. I was never able to understand their meaning. After my grandmother passed away and I was drowning in grief, a letter and a small, worn wooden box were delivered to me by her lawyer. The letter read, "To my dearest Madison, if the time has come for you to open this box, then I am no longer of this world. I can no longer protect you. Instead, I pray that what lies inside will be the key to freeing you from the curse that has tormented you for so many years." With trembling hands, I opened the wooden box. Inside, there was only a single faded photograph. It showed my mother Lauren in her younger days, sitting on a lakeside bench with a man who was not my father. The face of the man was familiar to me. He was the elder brother of my father Daniel Morgan, just 1 year older. In other words, my uncle Jonathan. The closeness between the two in that photograph was far beyond what would be expected of in-laws. My mother had gently placed her hand on Jonathan's arm and leaned against him, smiling happily. Jonathan, too, gazed at her with the tender look of a man beholding someone he deeply cherished. Even through the photograph, their intimate atmosphere was undeniable. My father had always been extremely reluctant to talk about his brother Jonathan. All I had ever been told was that their relationship was poor and that they had not met in decades. Why then did my uncle and my mother seem so close in that photograph? And why did my grandmother leave such a picture to me? At that moment, another memory suddenly resurfaced. It was a faint sense of discomfort I had once felt long ago when looking at our family photos. Vanessa was certainly social and confident, very much like our father. But when I looked more carefully, her gentle eyes and slightly wavy hair seemed to resemble my Uncle Jonathan, whose image I had only seen in a few old photographs. Could it be? No, such a ridiculous thing could not possibly be true. I shook my head, trying to drive away the terrifying thought. And yet, the seed of doubt that had sprouted once began quietly but surely to take root within my heart. The heir? And the burden. Was there some enormous secret hidden behind the words that had tormented me for so many years? I was finally beginning to understand the meaning of my grandmother's words. You are the true pride of this family. Holding those words close to my heart, I resolved to uncover the whole truth. From the moment I found that photograph, my quiet investigation began. It was a perilous gamble that threatened to overturn the very foundation of my life. And yet, I knew I could never allow myself to die without learning the truth. I tried to gather information from relatives. I reached out to my grandaunt, my grandmother's younger sister, whom I had met during my grandmother's funeral. She had always been knowledgeable about the affairs of the Morgan family and had a tendency to be a little talkative. Pretending to reminisce about my grandmother, I threw a question that went straight to the heart of the matter. Grandaunt, while looking at some old photos, I thought. Mother seemed to be very close with Uncle Jonathan, didn't she? At those words, my grandaunt's expression flickered, as if caught between nostalgia and hesitation, before she let out a deep sigh. Yes, that's right. Those two were truly special. My grandaunt began to speak with distant eyes. Jonathan, because of the way he was born, people expected less of him. But he never let that show. He was free-spirited, artistic, the kind of person with a mysterious charm who always drew people to him. Compared to him, your father Daniel was always serious, a bit unapproachable. At those words, I caught my breath. It felt as if I had caught a glimpse of the darkness my father must have carried in his heart. That is why Daniel always saw Jonathan as an enemy. Even though Daniel's lineage was superior, it was always his older brother who captured people's hearts. Especially when it came to your mother, Lauren. When Daniel announced he was marrying Lauren, the entire family was shocked. Everyone had thought that her heart belonged to Jonathan instead. At that moment, my grandaunt suddenly realized what she had said and quickly covered her mouth. Oh, forgive me. I let myself get carried away with old stories. But those words were more than enough. My doubts were growing closer to certainty. In search of conclusive proof, I requested the release of birth records from the hospital where Vanessa had been born, using the help of a private investigator. Several weeks later, I received the documents, and when I looked at them, I gasped. There it was, the section for witness at birth. And the name written there was not my father Daniel's. It was my Uncle Jonathan's signature. With trembling hands, I clutched the documents, and I knew with certainty. My hypothesis had not been mere delusion. The final step was a DNA test. This was the most difficult task. The problem was how to obtain a DNA sample from Uncle Jonathan, with whom we had had no contact for decades. Though the investigator had tracked down his current residence, collecting a sample from his discarded trash would be far too risky. After agonizing for weeks, I decided to take a gamble. From the investigation, I had already learned that my uncle had built a family of his own. And I had discovered that he had a daughter, my cousin Rachel. I had never met her before, but by tracing through social media, I managed to find her account. Then, mustering all my courage, I contacted her and begged her to meet me so I could explain the situation. At the designated cafe, I met Rachel for the first time. Though wary of me, she listened to what I had to say. As I showed her the photographs and the hospital records, and tearfully explained the doubts I had carried for so many years and the mistreatment I had suffered from my family, her expression gradually hardened. I had suspected as much. My parents and I have no connection with the rest of the relatives, but I know that my father left the Morgan family. Sometimes when he drank, he would mention Uncle Daniel and mutter with regret. I gave everything up. I never imagined it was about Aunt Lauren. Rachel fell silent for a while, then finally raised her head with determination. What my father did in the past is unforgivable. And if you have suffered because of it all this time, then the truth must be revealed. I will help you. I can obtain my father's toothbrush. Those words were the greatest salvation for me, who had been fighting such a lonely battle. A few days later, Rachel kept her promise and delivered my uncle's DNA sample to me. I sent everything to a testing facility, and the weeks I spent waiting for the results felt like an eternity. And then, at last, The day came when the results arrived by email. I sat alone in the penthouse living room as I opened the file. Displayed on the screen was a mercilessly clear figure, 99.9%. The documents I presented to my family were the result of the arduous investigation I had conducted over these past months. And then I looked calmly at my family sitting before me. My father, Daniel, was unable to hide his irritation, while my mother, Lauren, stared at the file with a look of fear. Vanessa, still not grasping the situation, screamed hysterically, "What is that document? Are you trying to threaten us?" Without answering, I untied the file and slid one document across the table. A copy of the hospital records from Vanessa's birth. The section for witness at birth. The signature there was not my father Daniel's. It was my Uncle Jonathan's. I could see the blood drain from both my father's and mother's faces. Their eyes searched me, trying to gauge how much I really knew. Ignoring them, I thrust the final piece of conclusive evidence, the DNA test report, right in front of Vanessa. "Look closely, Vanessa. This is scientific truth. This proves that there is no parent-child relationship between you and the man sitting there, Daniel Morgan." "Whoa, what?" Vanessa's eyes widened in shock. My father shouted, "Stop spouting nonsense," and tried to stand, but I stopped him by laying down the final document. The report showed that a parent-child relationship existed between Vanessa and my Uncle Jonathan. And this is the conclusion. Vanessa, your real father is not Daniel. It is his brother, my uncle, Jonathan Morgan. At that moment, it was as if time in the room had stopped. I began to speak, quietly yet with a voice that resonated into every corner of the room, laying bare the abhorrent secret that had been concealed in this family for 27 years. Now I finally understand why I was treated as the burden, while Vanessa was adored as the heir. The reason lies in this vile secret of mother's infidelity that the family has conspired to protect for 27 years. I looked straight at my mother. She averted her eyes, trembling. It all began with the distorted bloodline of the Morgan family. "Father, you were the legitimate heir, the true successor. But Uncle Jonathan was the child of grandfather's mistress, an illegitimate son. Am I wrong, Dad?" My father bit his lip and gave no answer. That silence was his confirmation. "Mother, your wealthy family wanted your daughter to marry the legitimate heir of the Morgan line. So you married father. But your heart always belonged to Uncle Jonathan, who, though lacking pedigree, possessed undeniable charm." Both my father and mother lowered their heads, remaining silent. "You sought comfort from the emptiness of a loveless marriage and committed a sin with your brother-in-law, Jonathan. And as a result, Vanessa was born. Am I wrong?" Vanessa's lips quivered, while my mother covered her face with her hands and began to sob. I then turned to my father, whose face was twisted with rage. "And you, Dad, you knew the truth. You knew your wife bore a child with the illegitimate brother you despised. Your pride must have been torn to shreds. But you did not choose divorce. Why? Because you did not want to give up the fortune and social status of mother's family." I raised my voice. "You devised a deranged plan to conceal this scandal and keep everything in your possession. Mother had intended to elope with my uncle when she gave birth, but you tracked her down immediately, drove your brother Jonathan out of the house, and made sure he would never appear again." I drew in a breath and struck at the very heart of this twisted family drama. But carrying such a secret would inevitably lead to cracks. That is why you needed to create a false story. That Vanessa was the rightful heir of the Morgan bloodline. And to accomplish that, you had to brand me, your true daughter, the one who actually carried your blood, with the false label of burden. You had to drive me away, isolate me, give me nothing, and strip me of any voice. You raised Vanessa, your brother's daughter, as the perfect heiresses with your own hands, out of revenge against your brother and as punishment to mother, didn't you? My words were no longer mere accusations. They were a cry from my soul against the curse that had eaten away at me for 32 years. My entire life was nothing more than a sacrifice to protect your pride, your lies, and your vanity. When my accusations ended, the room was engulfed in a deathly silence. The first to break that silence was Vanessa's scream. "That's a lie. It's all a lie." Shaken to her core, she shouted with a trembling voice as she clutched at Mother's arm. "Mom, answer me. Tell me she's lying. Tell me I'm Dad's daughter." But Lauren only sobbed uncontrollably and could not utter a word. That silence itself was the most eloquent confirmation of all. My father stood frozen, his face twisted into a terrifying mask where anger, despair, and shame all blended together. He could only let out a groan. Ah, I could see it clearly. The false image of a family, preserved like thin ice for 27 years, was shattering with a deafening crack. The secret they had fought so desperately to protect was now stripped bare by my hands, and from beneath it the hideous truth revealed itself. Vanessa could not withstand the collapse of the entire world she had believed in. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing like a child. I gazed quietly down upon Vanessa, crumpled on the floor, and my parents, crushed by despair. No shred of pity remained in me for them. With strength and absolute clarity, I declared, "Now do you understand? Who the true, rightful heir of the Morgan family is? The one who has the legitimate right to inherit father's estate is me, Madison Morgan. You have no right to demand anything further from the daughter who was sacrificed to conceal your adultery. And this house, earned through my own efforts, belongs to me alone. No one else has any right to live here." With unwavering resolve, I pointed toward the front door. "Now leave, and never cross the threshold of this penthouse again." My father tried to say something in return, but there was no strength left in his eyes. Silently, he took my mother by the arm, lifted her to her feet, and with unsteady steps supported Vanessa, the three of them departing from my fortress. Hearing the heavy door close, I slowly sat down and exhaled deeply for the first time. The history of a false family had now truly come to an end. I stood before the large window in the living room and once more gazed at the Manhattan night view. My heart felt completely different from just a few hours before, bright and clear. At last, I had been freed from the heavy chains of a fabricated family bond. This penthouse was my castle, a sanctuary no one could ever violate, won by my own strength. What begins now is not a life for someone else. It is my true life, with no lies and no falsehoods. In the reflection of the window, I saw my own face smiling from the heart for the first time in years. Half a year has passed since that stormy night. My life in quietness has finally begun to move forward in the truest sense. Daniel, my father, lost everything after that day. His divorce from my mother was finalized, and he forfeited most of the wealth of her family to which he had so desperately clung. The distorted grudge he had nursed against his illegitimate brother, and the obsession with punishing his wife, both lost their meaning. I hear that now he lives like an empty shell, alone in a small suburban house, clinging only to his pride. Lauren and Vanessa left the Morgan family and began living together. Since that day, I have received numerous voicemails and emails of apology from them. But I never replied. Mere words of apology could not move my heart. What finally stirred something in me was a story I heard from a friend. "Madison, you may not believe this, but Vanessa has changed. She sold all the luxury brands and jewelry she had owned, rented a tiny apartment with the money, and now works desperately at a cafe while supporting Aunt Lauren, who has become mentally unstable." Hearing that shocked me. For the first time in her life, Vanessa, who had only ever known how to receive from others, was trying to use her own strength to protect someone. Learning that they had finally begun to walk their lives on their own feet, I felt for the first time that I wanted to meet them. When I faced Vanessa at the cafe, her arrogance of the past seemed like a lie. She looked worn and weary, but in her eyes shone an earnest light I had never seen before. "Madison, I am truly sorry. I stole everything from you and yet never even realized what I had done. What I did is unforgivable." Beside her, lowering her head deeply, my mother was also in tears. "I ruined your life. I am a failure as a mother. I am so sorry. She repeated those words again and again. The hatred of so many years had not completely vanished. Yet, seeing them like this, I felt the ice that had long encased my heart begin to melt, just a little. I simply said one thing. It's all right now. A few weeks later, it was my cousin Rachel who reached out to me. Madison, I need to talk to you. It's about my father. Over the phone, Rachel began to speak quietly. After meeting me, she had spoken to her father, my uncle Jonathan. She told me how deeply he had suffered from his past sins. How, after being banished from the Morgan family and watched constantly by Daniel, he could never approach the woman he loved or his own child Vanessa, and could only watch from afar. How there had been days when he drowned himself in alcohol, consumed with self-blame. So I told my father everything. That you revealed the truth to Vanessa and the others, and that Vanessa is now trying to live on her own. All of it. At Rachel's words, I caught my breath. Then my father began to cry. He said, "Please, just once, let me meet Madison, my niece, and my daughter and apologize directly. Because of me, so many lives were thrown into chaos." I could not refuse such a request. And so, a month later, I sat on a park bench with my cousin Rachel. A short distance away, Vanessa and her real father, Jonathan, were speaking to each other for the first time. Awkward at first, they slowly began to exchange words. Watching them, tears swelled up in my eyes. They were not tears of sorrow. They were warm tears, for I could see that something broken was beginning to reconnect in a new form. The false family had collapsed. But from within its ruins, each of us would take time to build our true selves and our genuine bonds. I looked up at the sky. Over Manhattan, the sky stretched endlessly blue and clear.